Phenomenal. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Spatial Experience. Today, I have the great pleasure, again, to chat this time on recording with Edgar. Edgar, why don't you introduce yourself?
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Edgar, and I am a former staff research scientist at DeepMind. I just recently left to start my own company, Gibran, in which we are creating AI agents that give power back to the people.
I love it. I love it. So, congratulations on your big move. I think it's a very intriguing time for all of us in the industry and taking this very bold approach and starting something on your own in the right direction. So, congratulations and kudos. Wish you all the best as an entrepreneur, Edgar. Thank you so much for taking the time. I've always been very humbly learning each chat that we have, right? And today we wanted to focus about one of the most recent paper that you had written at Google DeepMind, right? Which is the theory of appropriateness with the application to generative artificial intelligence, right? So maybe for the audience out there, a high level, first of all, right? What is appropriateness for generative artificial intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very long paper, so it's definitely a collection of thoughts and ideas and a framework that we've been thinking about. So the fundamental insight here is that when we think about AI and alignment, so a lot of people are concerned about, well, we're going to have these AIs that are super powerful and are going to be acting in the world, right? They're going to be agentic. They're going to be doing things, not only just giving us answers. But even in the assistant case, there's still a question of how do we make sure that the answers that these agents are giving us or the actions that they're doing in the world are aligned in some sense with human values. The problem with this perspective is that we don't really have a concept of alignment between humans. And nonetheless, we're able to build cooperative structures and institutions and norms and laws and systems that enable us to interact with one another. However, when we start thinking about an AI system and an alignment, what we tend to do is we tend to simplify to the least common denominator of what would be the right way of an AI agent to do an action. And we think that that's too restrictive, right? We think that what we should be doing is instead taking into consideration the context, the social context. So it's not the same to ask a chatbot to be telling us how to build a bomb, which was one of the cases that was very early on, very concerning for people, right? Is that there is some latent information there that you don't want to be able to access. But if we're writing a playwright, or we are writing a episode for a TV series or something like that, right? Give me something plausible. I want to be talking about building a bomb in the context of that play that I'm writing. It doesn't need to be an accurate representation. It doesn't need to be instructions on how to do something that is dangerous. But I want to be able to talk about something like this. So this is highlighting that appropriateness is a concept that is much more general than that of alignment. Is one that takes into account the social context, the situation that you're in. And we think that that's a much more useful concept that is going to be very, very relevant as we start having these AIs, instead of just winding it down to be as inoffensive as possible and as safe as possible in all possible contexts, right? Which is, it's too restrictive.
Yeah, you're making a very compelling points, right? In terms of how we the AI assists us and individualistically, but also in a way that it understands the context itself, so that it matters then ultimately to us. And you're emphasizing also in this research paper, and I'm making a point that how AI can be supportive instead of supporting individualistic behavior, and therefore kind of more competitive behavior, the way that you described it, right? Towards more a collaborative behavior that sparks actually win-win situations, right? What were your thoughts there, and maybe learnings there that you can share?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, when we are starting to look at a world in which there's not going to be like a single AI that we interact with, right? But everyone is going to have their own AIs. Companies are going to have their AIs. We're going to be interacting with one another. We very, very soon go out of the space of the zero-sum game, right? We very, very soon we're stepping into the general sum game. So the places where cooperation can give us mutual benefits. And so I think one of the biggest paradigm shifts, I think, that we need to engage with is with this idea that we're not just going to be interacting with a single, let's say, the ChatGPT or something that is going to be a centralized system with a single objective function, and then everyone else is just interacting with that one, right? It is going to be a system in which we have our own objective function, which is a very multidimensional, very complex system. We will want to have our AI companions that are representing those preferences and those relationships, and then interacting with others and finding those win-win situations. Where we can increase our well-being collectively rather than competitively, right? We should be the success of humanity as a cultural evolutionary timescale has been our ability to find those win-win situations, right? I can wave a little bit of plastic on the other side of the planet to someone and they bring me food. That is one of the most fantastic things that are happening nowadays, right? That we can have that level of baseline collaboration, right? And of course, there are risks and dangers, and of course, there are situations in which we are going to be in competition. But I think there's too much of an emphasis in the competing aspect, and we should be focusing more on the scaffolding of competition and cooperation.
And it's interesting because the reflections that you just presented, even just the example that you did, right, with the plate and the human being, right? Ultimately, if you double click on that one for a second, it's a physical activity that we did. So meaning that's a behavior that was described within, let's say, a physical circumstance, right? So if we zoom out and then look back on the last 25 years and we go into the digital world that has been predominantly, right, shaping also our behavior. I mean, technology, right, creates something new, and on the parallel, you have new behaviors, but at the same time, the new behaviors are also shaped by technology, right? Mm-hmm. Did you also double click on the study? Maybe have you seen some maybe drifting aware humanity in the, let's call it the Web 2, right, whatever it was the last 25 years, in being more focused on eventually me and individualistic things? And what I'm alluding to, right, or kind of thinking of specifically is, things like mobile phone in combination with social media, Edgar, right, the last 25 years have truly formed a behavior of putting us as an individual at the center of, in the spotlight. I comment, I share, I post, right? And now maybe with AI becoming a true intelligent agentic companion, are we foreseeing that companion takes us almost, hacks us and say, wait a second, we are a society, it's not about you. Let's work together, right? Is there some deeper findings? I'm really curious. Obviously, you know Edgar very well. Phygital, we serve the next generation. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that as we are shaping this new digital world, right? The new digital world is not just going to be passively digital like in Web 2.0. It's going to be intelligent digital. And at the moment, we have relatively passive things to access the digital world, like our phones, right? And more the phones are more situated and aware and knowledgeable of the physical environment. But I envision a situation very soon in the future in which we're going to need a intelligence, not only just a physical phone, but also an intelligence on that phone to interact with that digital intelligent world that is around us. Now, going back to the point about this physicality, right? And whether it's going to be helping us be less of a egocentric view, in a sense, right? I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but just in the sense that it is centered.
Right.
Our experience currently is centered on us as an agent in the world, who is either posting or sharing with the ether, right? So we are posting things in a public or semi-public platform, and then we become a hub, a central point. And whether intelligences, companions that are coming with us, are going to be forcing us out of that scheme into a more collective perspective. I feel like the reality is that this is going to depend on us as individuals, right? Whatever we want, that we need to shape that future. We haven't decided collectively what is the right way of viewing it. We now know that there are some very real dangers and second-order effects and things that are happening because of that sort of egocentric, primarily interaction with the digital world at the moment, right? That it creates bubbles, it creates very easy mechanisms for isolation and for echo chambers. And there are societal knock-on effects based on these phenomena. But I don't think that that's the expected or desired situation that humans want to be in. I think whenever I interact with someone in the physical world, right, and they have a different opinion from mine, my reaction is not, I'm either going to yell at them or I'm going to block them and never see them again, right? There's more like, oh, okay, now I see that they have that aspect of their personality that maybe I don't particularly like. Like maybe one of my friends doesn't like tipping in restaurants or whatever, right? It's like, okay, fine. Maybe I disagree with that. I'm going to do a sanction, right? A small sanction of, hey, why don't you tip? It's like the workers are giving you a good service. Why don't you do that? But if that's a point of conflict, I'm not going to be hanging on to that for dear life, which unfortunately, it's much easier to do something like that in the digital world at the moment. Now, I want to think, and my view of the future is that our AI companions are going to actually help us. They're going to be augmenting our values, our desires. And so if I don't want to be living in a world in which I can just remove everyone who disagrees with me from my life, because that's not ultimately what I prefer, then I want to think that my AI companion is going to be slightly nudging me, with my consent, of course, in the direction of, you know what? How about no? Don't just isolate yourself. It's going to be a cognitive augmentation that lets me actually see a little bit further and see the long-term consequences of that very appealing short-term basin of attraction, right? As just be about yourself and surround yourself with people that agree with you.
That is very compelling. And just this morning I heard a podcast, and it was almost like along the lines from an essential perspective of what you're saying. So, and it was kind of, we have as a human being relying on computation the last, let's call it 50 years in a very proactive way. So we have given tasks to computation to support our objective. Mm-hmm. And now what you're describing is actually almost inverting it. So the computation understands in a very nuanced way, in a very contextual way, not just us as a human being, but us as a human being within a certain context, right? The moral context, right? And you use the word very gently to nudge us, right? Guide us, train us, right? And say, hey, Tommaso, wait a second, right? There are others, or maybe moral standards, and so it holds us accountable, right, to societal behaviors. And then the question is, which is a scary kind of question, but also compelling question, right? What does it mean ultimately? Who is training that agentic AI model, right? What's the inspiration, right? What is the data source? and what is the reasoning behind that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it. You hit the nail in the head, right? Because when I was talking about this, I was already pre-assuming that the AI that is your companion is 100% aligned with you, which is what we're trying to do at Gibran, right? Because there's this way of viewing. I've been studying cooperation theory for maybe now something like 12, 15 years. And I used to think that cooperation was what was needed to solve the challenges of our world. But I have relatively recently, let's say in the last couple of years, realized that there's this big danger, right? Uncomfortably. I was aware of it, but I didn't want to think about it too much, which is that the tools of cooperation can become the tools of coercion if you're not careful enough. So that nudge, right? That at the moment, that's what's happening basically with social media, for instance, right? There is a nudge that is happening. It's just we don't have control over it. It is nudging us inadvertently, maybe, right? So it's just there was an optimization function that some group of people set up for the algorithm of how to incentivize interactions online, and that shaped us into behaving slightly differently, right? So the problem with an external system setting incentives like this is that you end up shaping the behavior of a lot of people potentially in ways that they wouldn't have wanted if you had asked them, right?
Yeah.
If they had consent. So yeah, absolutely. I feel like that this is super important, right? Whatever augmentation is given to human cognition or human action, in the case of AIs, it needs to be aligned with that fundamental human. It cannot be partly aligned with some other corporate structure or some government or some or a head of a family or anything like that, right? It needs to be about the human empowerment. Now, when you talked about how we are having computation, right, that we used to be setting it into one direction, and now maybe that computation is telling us how to interact. I think this has always happened, right? In a sense, the reason why we use computation is because it's better than us, in a sense, right? Because even if it's as simple as you're using a calculator or even an abacus, right? Because it saves you compute effort, like our brain mental space or whatever, in order to do something much faster. We have improved the automation and we have improved the breadth and depth of that capacity. But I feel like it's always been about, well, this thing is going to do something that it's significantly better than me, or it's going to save me significant time and effort or space or whatever. But we always have this, there could be a second order effect, something that is an unintended consequence, right? So calculators made it so that the people who were paid for a living to do those calculations, well, they were out of a job and they needed to find something different to do. But fortunately, several of them learned how to become programmers, like in the Hidden Figures movie that was based on a real story, right? But I feel like we always use technology to augment us in ways that are superhuman. And whenever that technology is deployed, there are some second order effects that end up shaping humanity as a whole. There's always that feedback loop between culture and the deployment of technology. The only thing that is very unique about this new wave, right, is that these entities are now penetrating the space of unstructured human communication, right? The written text, the natural language communication. So what they're pushing is the limit of what is the level of structuredness in which they can execute well. It used to be that you needed to program a computer with an explicit algorithm that if one single thing was out of place, it would just fail completely. What we have now is systems that are significantly more robust and more able to to act and behave in a world that is not perfect, unstructured, noisy.
So Edgar, in large language models, the input, the root sources, right, called tokens, right, are text, and therefore they start reasoning and become smarter. And the smarter they become, the more, let's call it, we can collaborate, right? And now there is a new, let's say, also factor or maybe dimension that is being added to computation, which is space, which the last a couple of decades since the digital world, right, we have not had or considered as a factor. Right? So I'm kind of obviously leaning into large world model, where instead of 1D or 2D tokens, right, all of a sudden we have 3D and eventually also 4D tokens, which the fourth dimension can be either time or even interaction, right? And that becomes automatically another level of input for the machine to reason, to understand, right, and to serve us, right? And with that interaction, I think that the level of interaction, maybe sensibility, reaction from human being, because of space, because you are now immersed, because you are now part of it and not swiping through it, right? That might shape, again, human behavior, which was never considered so far since we know tech, right? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how this additional dimension of space, right, is impacting, obviously, our human being sensorial perception, right? The sight, and maybe the tact, the touch, right? Who knows? Maybe in the near future, even the smell or the taste, right? So what are your prediction how that might shape our behavior? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, right? Because the way that current language models work is that the only sense of time that they have is their context window, right? The beginning of the context window is the past, and the next token that they're predicting is immediately into the future, and the present is just what they're using in terms of computing the next one. But they don't really have a sense of time. They have some emergent properties in knowing that 2013 is in the past from 2020. But that's only because there's a lot of text that references that kind of reasoning. However, a lot of my research prior to the advent of language models was on situating the AIs, right, with multi-agent reinforcement learning, as you know, agents that were in a spatial environment, right, that were interacting in digital space, rather than in physical space. But there was always the promise of, okay, well, if we get them to understand physicality in an environment that is simulated, maybe then we can situate them with physicality in the real world, one way or another, right? They will understand concepts like objects and translations and things like this, right? And a lot of what DeepMind research was in, let's say, 2017 to 2022. That was kind of the golden age of the RL situated, embodied AIs, even if it were digital or physical either. I still think that that's really important, right? I think at the moment, because the way that language models just basically you liquefy all of the data and you put it through the weights, and then you hope that something is basically you want to condense concepts and culture and whatnot into the weights of a language model, right? And I feel like that is asking too much of the language model to then now magically understand things like physicality and in fact there's some benchmarks that show that just reasoning physically is one of the hardest things for language models to do at the moment, right? If you just say describing text like we would do, like, okay, you have a cup and you put a penny inside and you put a little piece of paper on top, you turn it upside down, you take the cup, you put it on the table, where is the penny? Like, all of us would know, well, it's on the page that it's right there on top of your hand, right? But a language model would struggle with that kind of reasoning. There is no aspect of time and there's no aspect of space that is explicitly put in a language model. Of course, there are plenty of researchers who are trying to advance this direction, right? Making a combination of robotics and language models and a bunch of other different directions. I mean, some of my friends are working in precisely this problem, but I personally think that we need to be much more from the ground up, first principles. The interactions matter, right? Interactions matter to a very high degree. There is basically no intelligence in the natural world that has no concept of interaction, right? Whereas our model of interaction for language models is literally you just say something and they say something back to you, and then you say something and you say something back to you. That is a very depaupered concept of interaction. They cannot even take a raw language model, right? They cannot even take a proactive, okay, three-way conversation. When do you jump in? They don't have a choice as to when they inject themselves into the conversation. When do they respond? You can do agentic AI systems on top, but fundamentally that's just a crutch that you're putting on a language model at the moment. I think that we need to create something a bit more from the ground up, based on the principles of space and time and interaction, for sure. Yeah,
I love it. So space, time, interaction, very also novel inputs for anything that is intelligent, right? I want to abstract even naming what it is. That will, in an ideal scenario, help us as a humanity in our everyday life, make it more fun, more valuable, right? More easier to live, right? So I'm really curious to, maybe as a final question here, I could talk for hours, but take us 5 years down the road, Edgar, right? Right now we are writing Gen Z, Gen Alpha, right? And Gen Beta was born actually in 2025, but they right now are just sleeping. So,
hopefully
right? Some parents out there, they're struggling maybe with the sleep, right? But joke aside, what can you share with us? What's your vision here, 5 years down the road, or maybe 10, depending on how far?
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? The new generations have a completely different worldview than we had when we were growing up. They are born in a world in which information is always available at your fingertips, and in fact, seeking information, it's kind of not even on the radar to some extent, right? Because they basically have been shaped by the way that the digital world works at the moment, that if they're interested in something, some service is going to find out and feed it to them. Right. So there's a very strong sense of passivity. Like, I don't need to proactively go and find information about things, because these algorithms, right, will find my interest very soon, right? If I just scroll on TikTok for a few minutes, then the algorithm is going to find out that I really like anime and I really like strawberry, and therefore it's going to show me some strawberry themed anime very soon, right? And then therefore if I have a question, I don't need to proactively go and do something. I mean, obviously this isn't a generalization, right? And I don't mean that everyone who is a Gen Alpha or a Gen Z or Gen Z is passive by no means, right? There's a huge amount of talent and a huge amount of
absolutely,
creativity that is happening, and because they are born into this world of technology and information being at their fingertips, they start with a level of mastery of the digital world that we could only dream of, right? And so I feel like however, I feel like there's something maybe that is creating a bigger disconnect with the physical world. I see a lot more people being disconnected with their physicality. And I think, again, going back to I don't think that's what people intrinsically want.
Makes total sense.
So most likely the wave of the future, right? If we solve, or if we at least address partially the problem of alignment and incentives and appropriateness and of doing the right thing for people, right? People will be going into the digital world through the physical world as well, right? So there was a reason why Pokemon Go was so loved by the younger generations, right? They would go out and walk for miles just to get that rare Pokemon that was 2 kilometers down the road.
And that matches 1,000% with and you know that, right? I mean, we have been having conversation for a while, right? What at Digital, our study, our research, our small groups right now with luckily 12,000 students across 500 colleges in the United States, like 3 ingredients that we really understood what this next generation needs is, one is they want to be outdoor, but at the same time, they don't want to miss out on the digital world. That's the reason why, number one, it's physical digital. Number two, and we mentioned that in this call, is instead of having this individualistic behavior, we are empowering them through technology to have more group behaviors. And so shifting from the being at the spotlight and that, you know, the I like, I comment, I share, I upload, towards we accomplish, we do, we build, and we create. And that gives you this feeling of, wow, I'm no longer the target for potential bullying. I'm not, just need to be conscious of what I put out there, and it has been draining their energy. And number three, from a methodical perspective, well, this next generation has a tremendous, huge urge to self-express themselves through creativity. Right, and by combining the three, we are truly, injecting this new mood, if you so want. I don't want to call it mental well-being, but ultimately, right, that is what it is, right? A new level of energy, Edgar.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because they were born in a digital world primarily.
Right.
Maybe it is the digital world that is going to help them explore the physical world safely. Right, because the physical world does not have that property that it tells you what you need and it handholds you, right? It doesn't have the property, so it's a bit more scary, right? It's like, well, anything could happen. Is the physical world, right? Something can actually physically hurt me or whatever, right? And therefore, that mixture of the physical and the digital can be what holds their hand and say, you can come out, it's safe. We can guide you.
Tomato has a smile on his face and goosebumps, because that's a really beautiful way to wrap up the episode. I want to repeat, right? So maybe the digital world becomes the agent, the guider, the companion that builds trust for the next generation to explore the physical world, right? Beautiful words to wrap up this Spatial Experience podcast. Edgar, thank you so much. I'm always humbled to learn from you, chat with you. And guys, I hope you found it helpful, and stay in touch. Bye.